It's crazy to think that the Mad Max game came out almost 10 years ago. It released the same day as Metal Gear and got very middling reviews, so it pretty much just flew under the radar. But not only do I think most of those reviewers were wrong, I think Mad Max is a modern classic. And in this video, I will tell you why. In many ways, Mad Max was dealt a bad hand. Not only did it release in 2015, the same year as probably some of the best and most anticipated games ever, games like The Witcher 3, Bloodborne, and Batman Arkham Knight. It also released the exact same date as Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. More on Metal Gear in a later video though.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Yeah, big boss? You sure did. It's crazy to think that Mad Max's origins dates back all the way to 1979, being a breakout hit for Mel Gibson. The first movie is basically an origin story of Mad Max, delving into how society collapses and how Mad Max becomes, well, Mad Max. The game skips all that and takes us straight to the part we all know and care about, the post-apocalyptic Wasteland. And I really think the game delivered on that promise. The developers, Avalanche, known from the Just Cause series, had set themselves a very difficult task with this one. Because when you sit down and really think about it, they had to take what is essentially a desert and somehow make it interesting while also making a good game. Some of this was achieved with the game systems themselves, more about those soon, and some of it was achieved with the visual design and dynamic systems of the game. Across several interviews, the developers explained that they took extra care to not only increase the draw distance in their game engine, but they even went as far as sending staff members to the Costa Rican jungle with the sole purpose of studying the colors of the sky. This extra care to detail is also apparent in the dynamic systems of the game world. You would think that traversing a desert could easily become quite boring, but here is the thing with the open world in Mad Max. Not only is it stuffed with tiny camps, enemy factions, and points of interests, but even if you do nothing, the world will find a way to interact with you. Aside from a continuous day-night cycle, you will come across enemies driving around at random, or perhaps you bump into a full-on convoy. Sometimes you'll see a dust devil or run into a full-on sandstorm, which will change gameplay dramatically for a short period. Before giving some examples and counter-arguments for why this is a modern classic, let's talk about what you actually do in this game. Mad Max is an open-world action-adventure game with very light RPG elements. During the game there will be driving and car combat, melee combat, as well as upgrading both strongholds, Max and Max's car. I honestly think all three of these elements are balanced quite nicely and play well off each other. The gameplay loop here is fantastic. While trying to film material for this video, I even found myself getting sidetracked quite often. This clip right here is actually a perfect example. I was driving to an objective when I spotted a moving sand trail way off in the distance. Having played the game for quite a while, I knew that this was very likely a convoy. That is exactly what that was. Suddenly, rather than going to my objective, I was pulled into a huge organic car chase that took several minutes. How organic and cool these chases are is really a strength of the game. Aside from a few specific story missions, these sequences are never scripted, but quite often end up feeling like they are. At this point in the game, I have completed the storyline, and I have all the tools available to me. For car combat specifically, it means that I have the harpoon. With this gadget I can pull down buildings, pull off parts of enemy cars, such as their wheels, or even pull on enemies to send them flying. I also have the Thunderpoon, which is an explosive javelin, and should the need arise, Max's shotgun will occasionally do the trick as well. Furthermore, the car also gets a sniper rifle built in, but I never use that myself. The car is just a fantastic tool in this game, and combined with Chum Bucket, who will basically speak for it and repair it, it's a whole character on its own.
Magnum opus, she's in pain.
Now, let's talk about the melee combat. At release, it got a lot of criticism for being too similar to the Batman Arkham style of combat. Remember that the game released in 2015. At this point, we already had 4 Batman games, and Shadow of Mordor released recently as well, so people had seen this system a lot. But there's just no getting around that this combat system is amazing and has stood the test of time. And this may be a borderline controversial take, but I actually think the melee combat in Mad Max is fantastic and fits the game perfectly. Keep in mind, this is not Batman. It's not Talion from Shadow of Mordor either. This is Mad Max, a guy who fights for scraps and water and basically lives off maggots and dog food. For this reason, the combat shouldn't be floaty or fluid. Mad Max is not a trapeze artist from Cirque du Soleil. The combat has to match the characters and the world. The combat is then heavy and sluggish, but it's still responsive. At times it might get frantic. If you start an attack, another enemy can come in and interrupt that attack. So yes, it's a fairly standard system, peppered in with some melee weapons and the occasional shotgun blast. But it's fitting for the tone of the game, and combined with Max being able to enter a rage mode, it feels more than adequate. It's quite fun, and I really enjoy it. Of course, there is no getting around that this is a game from 2015. And sure, by today's standards, the textures can look a bit grainy, but what really sidesteps this is how stylized the look is. Mad Max never went for ultra realism. Instead, it's a tiny bit cartoony with high saturation, making the gray and brown tones of the world pop more against the game's blue sky and sharp sunlight. Had this released today as a AA title and a few extra visual effects, I wouldn't have thought about it twice. Other than that, everything from buildings to cars and clothing just looks grimy and worn down. The details are not realistic to the point that you could imagine this world being lived in by today's standards of an open world game, but with the right expectations, it gets the job done. As for the Wasteland itself, well, in many ways it's impressive what the developers pulled off. Imagine being tasked with making an open world desert game and also making it interesting to go through. Yet it's full of visual cues showing where points of interest are located, and looking at the distance you'll see a realistic haze, further cementing that this is a warm and desolate place. After having completed the game, I decided to turn off the music to enjoy the quiet, raw nature of the Wasteland. The music isn't bad by any means, it gets the job done. But there's something about not having music that just suits the setting better. It also gives more space to really enjoy the sound design in the game. The contrast between a quiet apocalyptic setting suddenly being interrupted with engines, combat and explosions is just a lot cooler without music. As most of the game takes place in an outdoor desert, all the harsh sounds have a tiny bit of echo.
Mysterious force.
Speaking of combat and explosions, the explosions in this game are probably some of the best I've seen. And I don't just mean for a game from 2015, I mean for a game overall. Considering that they're all dynamic and not scripted, they just look fantastic. The contrast between light and explosions against the dark night is very well done, and really makes the visual effects pop. At this point you may have noticed that I haven't spent any time talking about the story,
Was one such man.
and that is for a very good reason. The story is not very good. That is not to say that the cinematics are bad or the dialogue is poorly acted, but the story is not the draw of the game. It's a vehicle to push the gameplay forward. From the start of the game, parts of the map, as well as several weapons and items, are kept locked till you hit a certain point of the story. And without spoiling anything, I can tell you that I completed the story. Not because it interested me, but simply to unlock the full game world. Another thing is that some players find the gameplay repetitive and lacking in innovation. I'll agree that, yes, this is an open world checklist through and through. Expect to roam the world looking for scrap, ending up in car chases and hand-to-hand combat. A lot, but there is a reason the gameplay holds up very well today. The car combat is, to this day, almost a decade later, completely unrivaled. No game has come close to making car combat this good, to any degree, since Mad Max released. And yes, the melee combat was done to death when the game released. But since then we have not seen many examples of it in the AAA space. The only thing that really comes to mind is the new Spider-Man games, but considering how great this combat system is, that's very surprising. I don't know why we haven't seen this combat system more. We live in a time where new major titles are releasing almost constantly. At the 2024 Summer Games Fest, Xbox alone showed enough games to make my wallet cry. And I don't know about you, but I haven't had the time to play even a quarter of the games I was interested in the last couple of years. Why would I go and spend 60 to 70 bucks on a game I'll barely have time to play? Instead, Mad Max is a great game with cool atmosphere, amazing car combat, and guess what? It can easily be bought for next to nothing. On Green Man Gaming I saw it for €3 the other day. For context, that is like the price of a protein bar. For the price of a protein bar, you can get a game that hardcore fans love and that offers tens of hours of fun. And I'd also like to add that if you have a Steam Deck or a handheld gaming PC, Mad Max is just perfect on the go. There's lots of stuff here to do that you can do within 10 to 5 minutes of game time. And with those thoughts, not only do I encourage you to pick up the game and give it a shot if you haven't tried it yet, I also think you should watch my video on why I think Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora could be a cult hit within a few years. For more content like this, click the logo. Have a great day.